how much longer do you think we'll be able to get away with, just name dropping, referring to all these much more successful hosts as friends of the show before we actually get in trouble?
I would guess that depends upon whether or not they're actually enemies of the show.
Yeah, let's.
If they're out to get us, what are they gonna get us on? I
Yeah.
mean, I have a passing familiarity with copyright laws and stuff. We've done nothing to
No
them. We've
libel,
called them
nothing
friends.
libel or
We've called them
slanderous.
friends.
Okay, yeah. Friends, fellow Romans, or Romans, fellow countrymen, something like that, right? That's how the
Something
line
like
goes.
that.
Welcome to the Voyage podcast, a show that traverses the oceans of myth and legend through the lens of Catholic theology and philosophy. Come aboard as we set sail in pursuit of the heroic life and Christian virtue, with your hosts, Mike Schramm and Jacob Platty.
Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of the Voyage podcast, where we're going to continue our conversation, get into more of the pop culture references on the symbolism of the mythical tree or mythological tree. We talked last time about how it had so much of the biblical connotations and all these theological conclusions that one can draw when the tree is brought into a story. We talked about Jonah. We talked, of course, about the references in the Gospels, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, tree of life, and how actually the cross sort of fulfills a lot of those, right? And that was kind of the big part of the conversation last time.
Yeah, that's what we got. I'll also throw in there that we talked a lot about how like culture and cultivation are entwined. How Eden was a paradise, a garden,
Yeah.
which means that it's this place where humans go and work with nature and stuff like that. And how to this day we still use trees to build our lives with our homes and things. They're just a part of our lives. But ultimately, the conversation did get to the cross being the ultimate tree.
And the three big examples or the three big symbols that trees kind of represent in ancient mythology, whether we're talking pagan or, Christian mythology, is life, connectedness or interconnectivity, and wisdom. And so as we went through some of those older stories, we could see how those themes were present specifically in the tree. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to see not only were they fulfilled, again, in those biblical examples, but how are they continued to be applied in a lot of these kind of newer, I guess, pop culture sort of references, whether they're drawing upon some of that biblical inspiration or just the ancient mythological inspiration. And you were even were alluding to how they actually, it's almost like it gets personified in, or is that kind of the right way to?
That's where I would go. Yeah. So what I would say is that we kind of threw out there at various times in this podcast how these types of experiences of humanity can either be personified in places, or as persons, right? And how there's oftentimes both, and there's not a firm division between the person and the place, right? And you're talking about trees, but ultimately trees turn into this kind of like symbol for nature itself,
Yeah.
right? Um, if not reality itself. But I'm super interested to really get into the nitty gritty on the personification and how trees and nature and all that stuff have been
Well,
personified.
and actually,
So
it's funny. I don't think you were necessarily intending this, but when you brought up they represent, all of nature, but they represent reality, and it actually kind of reminds me of some of the examples we're going to be using. Um, the tree sort of represents like the soul of the community, and I've had this thought of like, is the soul sort of an analog for, right, in the way that's the way that the human shares most in the nature of God is through the soul, right? With God being, God being the ground of reality itself, or the ground of reality. And
I mean, maybe if you want to get all Gnostic about it, Mike. I mean, but go on.
no, I would say by God, purely by God's nature. Now, this is obviously pre-incarnation, where we would say that, Jesus brings together the physical and the spiritual, or the material and immaterial. But if you're just thinking
Yeah.
of like the God of the philosophers, so to speak, right? Then
Sure.
you're
Yeah.
thinking along the lines of like God is the ground of being, or the ground of reality, or as Aquinas would say, or as Moses would say, existence itself. I am. And
No, I agree with you.
so
And the we talked about this in one episode where we're referring to the Holy Spirit. He is, all in all. He fills Spirit of life, who is everywhere present and fillest all things. This idea of just being the spirit of life, right?
mhm.
Lots of kind of overtones of what you're describing
Well,
there.
and it actually gets into, so let's go through. I mean, we can kind of reflect upon some of these more recent examples. What made me think of that idea of like because not only does the tree sort of represent the soul of a community, but some some examples will even say like they call it the soul tree, or if you remember the Avatar, the James Cameron Avatar movies, the first one I should say. Um,
Oh, right.
it's the big tree,
Yes.
right? Now it gets destroyed by the, imperialist humans and stuff, but like it's
Well,
the
there's
soul
what's all
tree.
right, so fascinating. Well, and there's actually 2
Yeah,
trees.
that's true. I forgot. Yeah.
Man, maybe there's, some kind of symbolism for, like, the 2 trees in the garden there.
Two, okay.
I'd have to think about
Or
that.
the two trees of Valinor, I thought
But
you were
there's
gonna
the
say.
tree they live in. Oh, well,
Ah.
that one may be a little bit more of a stretch. But where I was going with the Avatar stuff was they live in a tree, right? So that's the tree of the
Uh-huh.
community, right? But then there's also that kind of world tree or whatever it is, soul
It's
tree,
like a
whatever it
sacred,
is,
yeah, it's like a
that's
sacred tree of something.
where they plug in their USB tails
Yeah. Well,
and,
there that shows the connectivity, the
literally
interconnectivity.
connect with each other.
Mhm.
Well, and the implication being that they're connecting to, like, the world itself through that kind of ritual and things. Um, yeah, that's a very obvious example in modern myth making of how the tendrils of the tree, right? And we're all the branches of the tree and things like that. Did you see the second Avatar
I have
movie?
not seen the second one yet. No.
I have not seen the second one yet
Yeah.
either.
I mean,
I guess that goes to show just how enthusiastic
well,
I am about
when we do our episode.
I'll go watch it
No, when
sometime.
we do
Yeah.
our symbolism of water, that will be the resource that we'll use for that
Ooh,
one.
that's where you're gonna go, huh?
Well, not
With
the only
Avatar.
resource, but it will be a resource because it's the way of water is what it's called. So, no,
That's
yeah,
true.
it's not even.
Honestly, you automatically made me more interested in that movie than I ever was prior to
Yeah.
this moment, just by saying it's called The Way of Water and how does that play into water
Well,
symbolism.
yeah.
Okay, I'm suddenly more interested to see what James Cameron's take on this is.
I'm kind of like
Uh,
you where it's like, no, it's not like this was the most, and we're actually kind of the age where I think the people our age, we've had the strongest response to the first one.
we
And
were yeah, I was what, like, in my
yeah, I
mid-20s
think
when
it
that
was something
movie
like that.
came out, and it was, like, the biggest
I
movie
won't
ever.
say how much younger I
I
was than
don't
you, but at the time at least.
listen, I do not hate Avatar.
No.
I think it's okay. The problem is I've tried to rewatch it a couple times, and it's a really long movie,
Yeah.
and I guess I've just kinda been there. Though I will give credit for just how imaginative it is to look at, and that goes a long way with me. I love pretty looking stuff
You must be
in
a
movies
graphic
that are
designer or
super
something
imaginative.
to care so much
I'm a
about that
graphic
stuff.
designer.
I'm an ideas man. So,
And an Eastern Orthodox Christian, with our emphasis on art. So, it's an awesome movie to look at. I love the creativity on display. And it's not bad. It's obviously people have made the call out that it's Dances with Wolves,
yeah,
right?
just with aliens.
So if
Dances with
it's
aliens.
just dances with Smurf cats. But
Oh,
it's
you're making some
it's
enemies
fine. It's
today.
fine.
Yeah.
No, I like it. It's fine. It's
No,
fine.
actually, it's funny. So, and this isn't. I mean, this wasn't the main thrust of our conversation, but it did remind me of. So it was right. I was going into college as an undergrad, right as this phenomenon was happening, and this was a evangelical Protestant college that I was going to, and there was a lot of pushback to the like relativism and syncretism and like the, I guess, sort of the paganism in Avatar,
It's kind of
which
but it's very yeah, it's very kinda tribal
which again
pagan.
is like, well, isn't that kind of the idea, is that like we're going to it's like going to it's like going to the Americas and coming across this pagan group or whatever. But of course the earth people, which represent what, the colonizers, or they're the bad guys. So it's an allegory for us going over to America
But
and
you know what?
and
Hey,
colonizing
hey,
and stuff.
they're not. Whoa, whoa, whoa. You know what I will say here? And I know that you're just throwing this out there. I know it doesn't represent like your personal opinions here, but let me go ahead and shoot you down,
Oh,
Mike.
please.
Those those people that show up to that planet, they're not conquistadors, right? Like they're not Christians.
No.
They're not. They are scientists. That is the height of the kind of like
That's kind
scientific
of ironic, yeah.
mercantilism, you know. It is, yeah. There's nothing anti-Christian in that movie,
Oh,
right?
really?
Those
Yeah.
people, I don't see. Well,
No,
well,
no.
maybe. I don't know. I'd
Yeah.
have to think about that statement. But like, but certainly the people,
Gosh,
the
usually
colonizers, quote
I'm in
unquote,
your role. That's funny that we reversed like that. So,
they don't look like me. That's all I
yeah.
know. So
So yeah, that was, I guess, that wasn't so much personified, right? I mean, we see those trees representative of worship or sacredness, and then of connectivity, life for the
yep.
community, right? But what are some other, I mean, again, there's the obvious, like we can't avoid Tolkien when we're talking about trees and the mythology and theology of trees.
Oh, are there trees and
Are
is
there
there
some
some kind
important
of
trees, especially
tree
personified ones?
tree Yeah, and that I forget. I no.
Mm.
Obviously, Ents.
Yeah.
Yay, Ents. There's also Old Man Willow, right?
So yeah, that's the thing, is that
Where
it's,
my head went to Ents immediately, but then it also just clicked that there's more than
you
just
mean
them in
the
that
one
movie
who
or in
with a
that book.
character named Tree Beard you didn't think of when I brought up trees? So,
I have wait, before we get into Ents, I'm gonna talk about Swamp Thing today. And Swamp Thing has something called a Parliament of Trees.
okay.
And so, but
Well, you're
we'll
kind of
get
the,
to it.
like,
Let's
classic
let's
movie
go
monsters.
through.
Like, you're kinda more into the classic movie monsters. You're talking about Dracula, I don't know if it was a few episodes ago or a while back too. Um,
Yeah, whenever that was.
so
And I was talking about the book, but no, I am a horror movie guy. I mean, maybe less so than I used to be. Horror movies have different phases throughout like cinematic history, and there's always an undercurrent that's kind of dangerous. I'll admit that, but oftentimes a lot of those horror movies, especially the older stuff, um, I don't mind watching. I don't find them to be insanely offensive to my Christian sensibilities. Frankly, many of those movies are the only movies that take Christianity seriously.
well, that's I've heard
Eh,
that before too, that, and you'll hear whether it's different, like, Christian writers or Catholic writers who will talk about how, especially exorcism movies, but yeah, a lot of those monster movies, maybe like Van Helsing being another, he's like just the
go
character of Van
go
Helsing,
watch
but,
when
how
Halloween comes around, when Halloween season comes around. One of my favorite times of the year, and we will do a number of episodes about this topic in general. I am sure
oh
I will
boy.
force my
Yeah.
hand. But just a preview. You have like whatever 4, 5, 6 months. Go watch Hammer's first horror of Dracula. Just go watch it. And I won't even say anything, but it's amazing to watch that movie as a Christian
Hmm.
and be like, "Why don't we see this more often? Like, why are we so regulated away from this industry?"
Well, that's the thing, is
Of
like,
course, that came out in, like, '58 or something like that, so
it's the genre where you can, take spiritual evil seriously, and yeah, and then people will still take you seriously, you know?
mhm.
And so that's obviously from a Christian standpoint. I mean, we've been taking spiritual evil seriously for quite a while, and will continue to, God
Yes.
willing, right?
True.
And so it's one of those things where it's like, oh, it's kind of a, I mean, it's some one of those, it just confirms, right, what has been hopefully a part of the Christian's life, his or her entire life, or it's been a part of Christianity, whether it's a part of your individual
Well,
life.
it reinforces the Christian imagination, which is actually a huge part of why I signed on to this podcast to begin with, is I don't think that we have a Christian imagination
Mhm.
anymore, and as a culture, right? And I think that's actually a absolute spiritual reality. I think that there's principalities and powers of the air that are, otherwise what we would call the zeitgeist, right?
Mhm.
The spirit of the age. um, that are influencing us, right? We're swimming in their fishbowl, and it's not impersonal, right? I've given up the idea that there are impersonal like laws of physics per se. Now there might be impersonal laws of physics, um, but if there are, they're in my mind, and go ahead and correct me on this, folks. This is definitely not some dogma of either of our churches. But if there are impersonal laws of physics, they are impersonal in the way that the cells of my body are impersonal. That, my liver is impersonal, right? But they are basically just what we can measure
Well,
and touch or
and
whatever, but there's still a
even
spirit
that
behind it.
even so yeah, even in that example, what's interesting is so you would refer to your organs within your body, right, as impersonal or involuntary if we're talking about like muscles, but they still are ordered towards the whole. And what is that organizing principle in your individual body is the soul. So you could use the
Yep.
same thing, whether we're talking a piece of nature, like physical piece of nature, or a law of nature. And it's
Mhm.
one it can be impersonal, right? Or involuntary, so to speak, but it's organized and ordered towards the whole. And what is the organizing
And
principle? It would be that, again, the soul, right? It's that principle of life.
and again, correct me on this if you want, people. These are just the things that are swimming in my head these days. But this actually ties into this conversation because um, like so for example, gravity has a spirit behind it, as far as I'm concerned. That the forces of nature are what Mike was just saying, at least ordered towards some kind of principle as dictated by God. And I would suggest are manifested in that way through the medium of angelic realities. Um, that I do think probably means persons, right? And that they are um what that plays into this conversation is so let's just say I'm saying that gravity is a spiritual power, right? Gravity is some kind of manifestation in reality that is being being done by a spiritual power as designed by God, as dictated by God, right? To God's glory and for the order of the cosmos as God has designed it. Um, is gravity that spirit? Like, is gravity that person? Or is gravity the phenomenon that we experience that is wielded by that
Well,
person,
and
right?
it's
Well,
no
is death, and let me just
yeah.
quick finish. Is death a person or is it a place? Or is it a phenomenon, right? Is are the idea that this idea of avatars, right? Um, is it an experience or is it a place or is it a person, right? Is gravity an experience, a law of physics, or is it a person? I'm not actually even answering that question. I'm just pointing
Well,
out how it correlates with our
And this
conversation right
and
now.
this actually, it's no small thing that, what are the names of the choirs of angels? Not just seraphim and cherubim, but then we have thrones, powers, principalities, virtues. Like those names are there for a reason. Like it's not totally arbitrary why they're called that. And so that kind of plays in exactly what you were talking about of all the things that we assume are
Yeah, I don't think
impersonal.
this is me just making stuff up.
No,
Like,
this is
I'm not trying
we're
to. This
we're
is me pulling
consistent
from
with
Christian
our yeah, we're
tradition.
consistent
Yeah.
with the tradition. And so then
Yep.
why wouldn't it? If we're going to attribute, and again, not just attribute by our own authority, but recognize the personality behind these much, much bigger and more powerful things, then why wouldn't it be in these, so to speak? I don't actually mean smaller, but so to speak, smaller things in like the not just, other animals, but then plants like trees. And so us recognizing
Yep.
this, again, I I'm using personality loosely, so to speak, but seeing that sort of um deeper element. And actually what you were talking about a Christian imagination, or yeah, Christian imagination, I think. So another phrase that you'll
Yep.
sometimes hear in, again, I don't think exclusively Catholic circles, but it's called a sacramental worldview or an incarnational
Yeah, sure.
worldview. And It's
Yep.
it's always brought up in the same breath as when you're talking about Tolkien, because that was so much a part of the Tolkien's work, including
There's a larger converse.
yeah.
Oh,
No,
sorry,
no,
go
no,
ahead.
that's it.
Oh, you're gonna bring up the Ents again.
Yeah.
You just want to talk about those
Well,
Ents, don't you?
I mean, that's kind of the
They
it's kind of the, you know, the whole point of the show, but that is sort of my job to keep you on task a little bit.
not if I have anything to say
Yeah.
about it, Mike. Um,
We don't get to do
no,
3-hour
but there's this
episodes, Jacob, so
there's this larger conversation on the internet about re-enchanting reality, about bringing enchantment back into reality that I'm pretty keen on. I'm pretty keen on hearing the different voices that are contributing to it. But you know, what makes this idea of Christian imagination, one of my favorite lines from C.S. Lewis, I'm sure I've talked about it on this show at some point, is he makes reference to how modernity has turned us all into basilisks, this mythical creature that turns things to stone when it looks at them.
mm.
And we look around the world and we see everything, it just turns to stone. Everything we see turns dead. Because at some point in early modernity, right, like 500 years ago, with the advent of scientific discoveries and
Well,
the
and
process and
just
all
the,
that.
like,
You
the abject materialism that it's sort of engendered too.
well, it becomes everything becomes yeah. So in other words, um, gravity is not considered a living thing, right? And I'm not necessarily saying that if it's living, it's not living the way we think of living as far as like biological organisms go. But we get this idea that the laws of physics, and I recognize that this idea of laws goes back prior to modernity, right? But I would think, because I actually can't, I don't know if I've read anything enough about this, but like I would think that when early Christians are talking about like the laws of things, they're talking about like laws the way that God gave laws to humanity, and that those laws are performed by humans,
Well,
right?
and even so, to speak on that actually, 'cause, I don't know if it would warrant its own episode, but St. Thomas Aquinas, believe it or not, has something to say about this, and I think it actually speaks to what
What?
you were talking about,
He
how
hardly had anything to say about
how,
anything.
a
What a lucky
like,
coincidence.
following God's quote unquote laws, right? Following God's rules. It wasn't just about checking the right boxes and it wasn't just about following the rules. It was a participation in God's nature when you followed those rules, when you
Right.
followed those laws. And actually, what Aquinas was saying is he says the natural law itself, the law that is quote unquote written on our hearts, the natural law is a participation in the eternal law, that it flows from the eternal
Mhm.
law, which is God's nature itself. And so
Sure,
and so
sure.
even when so that doesn't just talk about morality, like moral laws. When you refer to things as, you know, laws of physics or laws of gravity or whatever, they flow from something as well. And you could say they flow from the nature of God, and that's fine. And you know, you can get into the specifics of that. But it's more what I want to emphasize, or what I think you were pointing to as well, is it all speaks back to this idea of participation, which ultimately, again,
Mhm.
surprise, surprise, from a Catholic and Orthodox perspective, it's all about theosis, because it's just
Yep,
another
sure.
kind of tributary of the river of theosis, of the living waters of theosis.
Absolutely.
And so it's just another kind of angle that you can look at that same, again, that's like the, from a human standpoint, like that's the doctrine, you know, so to speak.
Well, and what makes this fun, and what's finally gonna bring us to talking about Ents,
You
is,
promise?
this, I promise, Mike. Um, but, is that with this idea that the forces of the world, the forces of reality itself, do not need to be assumed to be unliving or just undirected or whatever. They just happen to be what people would call like brute facts in this kind of scientific
Mhm.
context. It's just a brute fact. It just does it. There's no way we can know why it does it. It just does it, right? Um, it's like, well, maybe there's actually someone making that happen. Real quick, G.K. Chesterton has another great quote related to this where he talks about how every time a flower is brought forth from the field, we look at that and say, "Oh, it's just the result of this natural process." But Chesterton was like, "What if God just loves making flowers?"
Mhm.
And like he is so in love with making flowers that he just does it millions of times a day. In other words, there's this active
Yeah.
participation that the flower doesn't
And
just bring itself to life. God is sculpting that
Now it's
flower
not
into
just
existence
personal, but it's
one by
also
one.
enjoyment, and so there's that joy element. I've heard something similar, and I thought
Mhm.
maybe this is Chesterton or this was C.S. Lewis, but similar reference to a sunrise, where in the same way that like a
Mm.
young child will enjoy the game of peekaboo over and over, not because they don't have object permanence yet, but because they enjoy the game, like they get the enjoyment out of the game itself. It's almost like
Yep.
God seeing the sunrise, it's like the child playing it for the first time. And so God is saying again, again, and it adds so much more,
Yes,
like I said,
absolutely.
beauty and awe to the stuff that we take for granted. Like you said,
Oh, that's a great word. Yeah, and
yeah, no, that's
the more you get into this mindset, which I'm still trying to do because, like, you really have to cleanse your mind, right? To use language out of the New Testament. We are so sucked into the modern zeitgeist, but the more you get into this this old way of
mm,
thinking, reality becomes adventurous.
mm.
Reality becomes amazing, right? And
Are you trying to say
awe-inspiring
we're
and
all on a hero's
fun.
journey, Jacob? Because I've seen a YouTube video that disagrees with you.
We should bring up that
No,
YouTube
we
video for
can't.
an
Yeah,
episode
not
sometime.
now. Yeah.
Yeah, not now. No, no, no. But yes,
No,
absolutely. I have
that's the
thoughts.
thing. That's why
Um,
that's the assumption that unfortunately some people fight against is when you see reality as, like you were saying, with the sense of awe or wonder, then your life does, as monotonous or quote or boring, so to speak, as your life seems to be on the outside, you get to be on this hero's journey.
yep. Daily, every single day. And so, and man, we're getting too far into what I
I
would
know, no,
say that
this is
that
our
other
Secret
yeah.
Life of
I know.
Walter
All
Mitty
right,
episode.
I gotta redirect. Let's talk about ends. But no, that what another thing. So when you're viewing this world that it's full of like intention, in the old mindset and ancient mindset, pre-modern mindsets that tended to get affiliated with the idea of like dryads or naiads.
Mm.
Dryads being tree folk, I think.
Yeah, there's like
Naiads being
forest
like
spirits,
water
river
folk.
spirits, yeah,
Yeah, all these things, right? Now
fairies.
we immediately dismiss all that as whatever pagan hogwash or whatever. But maybe the truth of it is this idea that angelic powers are in fact constantly bringing these things to life for us. And this idea of dryads is very informative of the ends in
Yeah,
Tolkien,
because
right? Even though they're not quite the same, they're a little
well,
different,
because
but
that's one of the things is that you're not supposed to just see Ents as walking trees, but that they do inhabit this sort of like spirit of the forest sort of thing. And
mhm,
yeah,
mhm.
Treebeard, especially being one of the oldest, and there's even those funny lines where he'll complain about the younger trees and putting them in their place or whatever. But
Yes,
but
right,
he not only kind of represents the spirit of the but the age, the wisdom of the forest as well, and really it's sort of like Middle Earth as a microcosm or a microcosm of Middle Earth is what's supposed to like
right.
Fanghorn and those other forests are supposed to kind of be.
Would you say, and this goes back to the Old Man Willow element of the story
Oh
too in
yeah,
the books, when give it to me because his name's not
Tom Bomb.
Tom
Okay,
Bombadil.
yeah, tries to eat the
Now
hobbits, and then Tom Bombadil saves them. This is
saves
relatively
them
early in the
because he has
first book.
control over the
Yeah,
tree. Yeah, yeah. Um, and what no one really knows who Tom Bombadil is, right? Um,
that's the
but
title
where
of
I'm
the
gonna bring
famous
him into this.
essay. Who is Tom Bombadil? That's
uh,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
um, well, I didn't need an essay to give me that because I don't know who he is. So
It's
I ask of my
just
own self,
authentic.
who is Tom Bombadil? But there's this idea of like the Green Man, right?
Hmm.
In cultures everywhere, really, but certainly in England, right? And so the Green Man is got all these different permutations. Some of them are more tree-like, and some of them are more human-like. And it just kind of it makes you wonder how much of the Green Man, because I don't think Tom Bombadil is the Green Man. I'm not saying that he
Hmm.
is, but I also don't. Maybe Beard and the Ents are closer approximations to what like a tree man is,
Okay.
which I guess I should just say like a tree man is this fascinating meme basically from across cultures of a face, typically. Sometimes the whole body. Sometimes he's on a can of green
Hmm.
beans.
Oh,
But
yeah.
where he ends giant and he has a big blue ox. No, I'm
Now
just
yeah,
mixing
now
up
you're
folklore now.
conflating a bunch of
Uh,
stuff.
but he's made of wood or of leaves, right? Like he has a beard made out of leaves or something like that. And he just seems to represent the forest. And there's this idea that he is the spirit of seasons. There's this idea that he represents nature, basically. But he gets stuck everywhere, right? Like he's on churches all the time, for example.
Hmm.
And there's not he doesn't have like a folklore or a mythology. He's he's this really interesting just like artistic depiction that people just seem to have like intuited. He's not necessarily representing, a myth per se. And so he's kind of unique in like the area of folklore studies as far as I know. But the sense that he is like nature itself,
Yeah.
right? Maybe Tom Bombadil's kind of like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a
Or
bunch of different proposals, obviously since in the last 70 years or so since it came out. Um, and that, and then he has a lot of characters because like Bjorn is another one where they have this very intimate connection with the forest. Not quite as close as like we've been saying, like they're depicted as a tree itself, like Treebeard has been. Um,
mm,
What's interesting too is, so I don't know how much this ties into some of the other stuff you've been saying. I think the whole kind of representative of, like I said, the forest, but then also being kind of a microcosm of Middle Earth. Uh, so J.R.R. Tolkien, in one of his letters, he actually compares the church to a great tree, which I know is not entirely unique, but it's
we talked
significant.
about that last episode. Talk about like
Oh,
the birds of
yeah,
the
yeah,
air
yeah.
coming into the
Well,
tree
okay,
and stuff like
so
that.
but what's significant, like I said, it's not that he made up that concept, but when we see all the other stuff that he's done with
Tolkien stole my
trees, yeah,
idea.
something like that. Um, so what's significant is when we know all the other stuff that he talks about with trees and makes the connection between the church and a tree, that's where some of these puzzle pieces start getting put into place. So whether we're
Mm,
talking in terms of like the life of or representative of the whole or the organizing force, when we talk about what was the church meant to be, but it was supposed to be the incarnation of Christ extended through the rest of time. And
mm,
how,
mhm, yep, yep.
the one that guides the church is the Holy Spirit. And the church is supposed to be the presence of God in that organizing principle for the rest of the world, for the rest of creation. Again, going
Yep.
forward until the second
And
coming.
it's kind of fractal. It's kind of fractal in the sense that like the church is like a priesthood of the people
Mm,
and the people is like the nations, right? So it's there's there's the concept of creation itself being redeemed,
mm.
and it starts in the church, and the church redeems on behalf of creation and grows in creation as it
Well, and
grows,
this
right?
is this
As
is
it
what makes
spreads
St.
throughout the
Paul's
world.
reference to Jesus as the firstborn of many, or the firstborn of all or the
Mhm.
first fruits, I should say, in regards to his
Yep.
resurrection, because then it's the rest of the church that is resurrected in Christ or in participation in Christ. And so,
Well, and what he says, unless the seed is sown, it cannot grow, right?
mm,
Just a quick paraphrase what he said in the Gospels. But there's this idea of it, Christ is the seed, and in the context of the parable itself, you get the idea that he's talking like a field of grain or something like that. But we can take that and loosely apply it to the idea of the trees and things like that, and just like natural growth as such.
well,
Um,
and
no, co-
oh, sorry.
go on.
Another good example from Tolkien outside of the Lord of the Rings, actually, because we haven't even gotten into the two trees of Valinor or the white tree of Gondor, so two other really prominent trees just in the Lord of the Rings. But he wrote this short story. Did you ever read Leaf by Niggle by
You
Tolkien?
know,
It's found
I
in
know what you're talking about, and I don't remember if I don't remember it, so
it's
I guess it didn't really make a big
so
impression on me if I
it's a
did.
really, I mean, it's promoted by, like I said, a lot of people who are trying to, a lot of Catholics, other Christians who are trying to not just, hey, here's something that you haven't heard of by Tolkien before, but it portrays very well. And it's actually usually when it's published, because it's just a short story, it's usually published in the same volume as his On Fairy Stories, because it's
Hmm.
used as a really good example. And like I said, a short example, you don't have to read the entire Lord of the Rings to see that sacramental vision, that sacramental view of creation in this, I don't know, it's probably like 20, 25 pages
I
or so.
must I must not have read it. I
So
feel like I would have
so
familiarity with it better.
the character's name is Nigel, and is living a relatively like ordinary life, and talking about he's got this neighbor that he kind of gets put upon very often, but he's got this big project. He wants to paint, and he's painting this big tree. Now, he's really, really good at painting these individual leaves and adding these leaves to this big grand painting, and how it's getting bigger and bigger. But little things in his life are always preventing him from making progress on this. And
Hmm.
what eventually happens is so he has to, again, he gets put upon by this neighbor. It actually eventually leads to him getting sick and then dying. And now this is all told sort of like symbolically. It doesn't show his funeral, but he's taken away on this journey, and it's referred to at the beginning of the story as this journey that he knows he has to go on. Well, that's
Hmm.
the afterlife. But it actually talks about
Yeah.
his sort of like purification process after that. And so people again have looked to this story as like, oh, this is like his allegory for kind of purgatory too. But it's really so much more than that. That's not just what Tolkien was trying to do. He wasn't trying to write an apologetic on purgatory. What it then
Hmm.
shows is part of this process is almost like a reconciliation with this neighbor that in his mind throughout his life was keeping him from doing the thing he was meant to do, what he was supposed to do, when that was part of his growing and his growth process. And his neighbor was in the same boat as him. He had to kind of grow himself throughout his own journey. But it sort of culminates, or it ends with, they come to this field, and what does Nigel see? He sees that tree that he had always imagined in his mind, but he couldn't quite get down on his canvas, but he sees it in reality. And so we
Huh.
have this, like I said, this vision of our purpose or our journey in life, and our vocation in life. And it's not that what God is calling us to is in a different direction. It's that it's so much more than the picture we have in our head or the plans that we have sort of made. And like I said, that's not like
I
the
like
one
that.
moral of the story. That's not the point, is just to tell us that one moral. But that's one of those really powerful elements that, and again, what does Tolkien use? He uses a tree to tell that story,
Yeah, no,
right?
absolutely.
And it's not
That's
arbitrary that he
I'll have to
uses
check it
that
out.
tree. Yeah, you can find it. You can
No.
find it for free online, but
Yeah, I'm sure it's anywhere. Going back to his Middle Earth creation with the white tree of Gondor,
mhm,
right? That kind of reminds me. I feel like they're akin to each other. This idea that the tree is healthy when the king is healthy,
yeah,
and when the king is healthy, the kingdom is healthy, right? And so it's a decayed tree when Aragorn is not taking his role as king. But then it starts to flourish again when the king is back in his place. So you got the idea that the tree is this symbol, this sign, this thing you can look at that is tethered to the reality of the realm, that shows you the reality of the realm. And if that tree is sick, the realm is
mhm.
sick. If that tree is healthy, the realm is healthy. This is almost Platonic. It's like what the tree should look like is what the kingdom
Well,
should look like. And that goes back to your
and
Nigel story
extend this
with
further
the
actually,
painting
because
and
do you
the
remember what happens at the end of the series too? Is doesn't Sam get like one of the seeds from the white tree? And then
Oh,
when they
yeah.
cut down the
Yeah.
tree in the Shire, when Saruman
He
and
plants a new
yeah,
one.
that's what he
Yes.
puts. So there again, it's not only the idea of now the kingdom is being extended, right? Because the hobbits had never had interaction with the great men of Numenor or the elves to the degree that obviously Bilbo and Frodo and they all had during the story. And now it's like
Mhm.
Gondor, the kingdom of Gondor is being extended, right? And it's the
Sure,
same sort
sure.
of analogy for the church, where it's like that's the Great Commission, is the kingdom is being extended, and it's picking up the pieces from these burnt down or broken cultures that it engages with too.
Yeah, I can dig that.
So
Um, when you're looking at Ents, right? And they have like the Entmoot, right? Like
Mhm.
they are this group of people, tree creatures, trees, living trees, that speak on behalf of the forest. Oh, well, that all right. That reminds me of a Lorax. We can talk about Lorax. All right, so let me. All right, so here you go. I played the Lorax in high school.
So you
When
speak with authority.
when we did a play. I do.
You're gonna tap
And
into
I
that
was really,
tap into that
really
character for a second.
I was really disappointed when they cast Danny DeVito and not
Mm.
me in the animated film. Evidently,
It's all
no
about
one
who
saw
you
my
know.
play.
It's all about who you know. That's just
It
it.
is. It just goes to show you, doesn't it?
Mhm.
You wanna hear my Lorax voice?
Please.
I'm gonna be careful with see if I can do ahem, ahem, ahem.
Unique New York.
I'm the Lorax. I speak for the trees. I speak for the trees have no tongues. And I'm asking you, sir, at the top of my lungs.
It
And then I don't
just
remember
comes
what it
right
says after
back.
that.
Yeah, wow, that was
It comes no, I had to say
it
that line
felt
a
like I
bunch
was there.
in that
It
play.
felt like I was there.
Did you feel the Lorax
Uh-huh.
speaking through me?
Yeah.
Did I become the spirit of the
So
Lorax? Was he embodying
yeah,
me?
yeah, I felt like that I felt just
And now
as
imagine me
uncomfortable as the boy speaking to the Lorax in the story. I felt that same level of discomfort, and that was kind of the point, right? Is and so
Hey, no one said that, trees, this idea of green men and nature figures and dryads and even ents are in that realm of kind of neutrality. They're almost
mm,
amoral. Like they don't not immoral, amoral. Like the ents say, like Treebeard says, I'm on the tree side.
yeah,
I'm on no one's side. I'm on the tree side. Which is actually when I brought up Tom Bombadil, like the ring has no effect on him,
mhm,
right? Like it's this fascinating moment, this really exciting moment, frankly, in the series where he just like plays with the ring, makes it disappear, and freaks
it's
everybody out,
confounding. It's
and then brings it
confounding, which
back.
is what a trickster is
Yeah,
supposed to
it's
be.
very mysterious. Yeah, absolutely. But it makes I want like would Treebeard be affected by the ring?
Mm,
And it's like I honestly kind of don't think so. Who knows? Maybe he would.
yeah,
But I feel like he's almost Bombadil-esque, and that's why I think that's literally why I like it's like Treebeard's kinda like the Ents. It wasn't the other way around.
mm,
Even though Treebeard's older and all that and the Bombadil's older and
yeah,
all that. But anyway, they don't care. They're just they're for the trees, right? And wild nature is ambivalent towards the needs of man, which is why man has to go make a relationship with
yeah,
nature
cooperate.
and
Yeah.
cultivate it. Yep, cooperate with it. Um,
So, at the risk of making this a Tolkien podcast,
no, I can move on for sure because where I was going with this was Swamp Thing.
okay,
Swamp Thing has a parliament of trees, and they're basically it's just like the Entmoot. It's not
the
quite
whole
the same,
council of God, but
but
now it's the whole council of Swamp Thing.
it's actually no. Well, yes, you are
It's the
remarkably
divine
accurate in
council,
all those
but
things.
yeah.
You said them so flippantly, and yet the profundity of what just came
Story
out
of
of
my
you.
life.
Yes. It's, so the Parliament of Trees is it exists in an ethereal realm called the Green, right? And the Green is basically the mystical realm of nature. Like it is the force behind nature. It is this spiritual plane of nature existence, right? And there's different planes within the context of Swamp Thing. There's like the red and there's the gray, and they have interesting color things that kind of invokes like Green Lantern
Mhm.
stuff, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of overlap there, to be honest. Um, I think there actually is like some stories where like Green Lantern or Swamp Thing might become like a Green Lantern or something like that. I forget, but like anyway, but they live in the green. So there's your divine
Yeah.
council. I'll give you that. It's a spiritual realm. And they are the avatars of all the prior swamp things. And the swamp thing is actually there can be only one, Highlander
Okay.
style. And he is the embodiment of the green, right? He has the power of the green and he wields the power of the green. And when a swamp thing's time is over, he goes to join the Parliament of Trees, and then they become entish. Like, so the ents, there's like a lot of the ents, they like take root, right?
Mhm.
Or and they become more tree-like or whatever. The Parliament of Trees is basically Swamp Things that go and just, like, go to become trees, but they still have, like, a psychic
Okay.
connection, and so they can still communicate and talk, and they're like they're literally a parliament,
Mm.
they're a governing body, and every other kind of like the red and the gray has its own kind of parliaments and things like that. But that is the basic mythos behind Swamp
Hmm.
Thing. And Swamp Thing is he's one of my favorite characters. He starts out as a human, but then Alan Moore, that wild man from England, he actually revolutionized his backgrounds where and this is kind of interesting. Turns out that Swamp Thing was never Alec Holland. Alec Holland was a scientist. He was making a bio-restorative chemical thing down in the swamps of Louisiana, and his place gets blown up by bad guys. And then for like the first like 15 years of Swamp Thing's comic run, his biochemical stuff gets on him, and in the swamp, it transforms him into the Swamp Thing.
Hmm.
What Alan Moore does is he says that what happened is the body of Alec Holland got cast into the swamp, and the swamp plus the chemical stuff that he was playing with had this reaction where they absorbed basically the memories of Alec Holland, but Alec Holland died, but his consciousness was reborn. Again, not his like he's separate. Like there's a plot point where Swamp Thing goes and meets the ghost of Alec
Hmm.
Holland, right? Like they are no longer the same person. But the Swamp Thing is informed by the consciousness. He is a duplicate of the consciousness of Alec
Hmm.
Holland. This is very Buddhisty,
Yeah, it
by the
sounds like a
way. This
transmigration of
is
souls sort of thing. You were sort of, I mean,
It
it
is. This is
speaks.
very super Buddhist, basically. This is kind of what they mean by reincarnation. If you hear when Buddhism's talking,
Mm.
it's really not necessarily like the same thing as like Hindu reincarnation. Um, but so anyway, that's what Swamp Thing is he is a creature of plant and of the green, right? But he just has the identity of Alec Holland, right? Um, you know, I've been rereading through Swamp Thing because I've just been in that mood, and I forgot that he goes into the underworld
Oh, so
to save
yeah.
his beloved bride.
Which
Yeah, there's
again,
a
it's
there's a whole
yeah, that's
underworld
classic
story.
mythology. You got to have an underworld, some sort of underworld kind of parallel too. So,
Yeah.
um,
So when I got to that point, I was like, "Oh wow, I totally forgot about this."
you talked a lot about like the sense of connection, right? Connecting to whether it was in the parliament, connecting to the forest, or becoming like how every part of the forest was interconnected amongst like the different trees, and trees have always sort of had that role of, like we said, life giving. We haven't talked so much about wisdom in this one, but then also of connection, and we see that with some of our other tree examples. I mentioned to you, I think, or we've talked separately about. So there's the Brave New World book, but then and that was written like back in the, I think, 20s or 30s by Aldous Huxley. But then there was the show put on by Peacock a couple of years ago, which is just sort of like a
Mm,
retelling of the book, but they take a few liberties, some good, some bad. It wasn't a very successful show, but I was interested in the book, and so I wanted to see the show. And what I thought
yeah.
was, so we talked about how in Hinduism there is the Indra, which is that like paradise walled garden, the tree, sort of the representative tree thing, and how it has that idea of connection. Well,
Mm,
in Brave New World, the title that they give to this connecting thing of all of New London is, they call it Indra. It's the Indra network that was sort of created, that kind of created this dystopian futuristic environment. And one of the big
mm.
plot points is the savage John not being willing to plug in to Indra, not being willing to kind of like take this.
He's just not gonna put his tail in that soul tree.
Yeah, so it's actually in the eyeball, but yeah, it's you sort of like
Oh
take
wow.
a, yeah, they take
Talk
it's
about
you
dystopia.
put a lens and it like connects to your eyeball. It's got some, it
Okay.
has some creepy scenes, but
Is
anyway.
it is this the internet? Like,
Well,
is it what is it?
so
Like,
yeah,
it
basically
is
when you plug into Indra, that's the thing where you can, first of all, you can see everybody's caste, because if you remember from Brave New World, there's a caste system of alphas, betas, all the way to
Oh, sure.
epsilons. And the epsilons are like the servant class. So you're able to see what everybody's status is, and you're able to, yeah, it's kind of
They
like
don't just wear like orange jumpsuits and like green jumpsuits or
they have
whatever.
that too, yeah. But
Oh, so this is just redundant.
well,
Okay.
well,
So
that's
far
actually mostly
unimpressed,
the epsilons,
but
but like the alphas and betas, they have a little bit more freedom, to be creative with their outfits. But it also plugs you
okay.
into every camera, which surrounds the entire community too. So you can actually at any moment see where anybody else is, even if they're not right in front of
Weird.
you. And that's obviously, one of the reasons why he doesn't ever want to is he wants that freedom of being the savage, uh, and
Yeah.
stuff. So there again, you could say it's the
Also,
connectivity,
PSA,
distorted connectivity.
always always put the little thing on your laptop closed because the government's watching you.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Um,
anyway, that's what that reminds me of.
well, and then actually we haven't talked about Groot yet, but if you want to talk about
Oh yeah,
personification of the
Groot.
tree, I mean, that's again another literal tree person that, and do you remember the scene at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy #1? Because what's the only thing that Groot ever says? Again, from our language, from our perspective.
I am Groot.
But do you remember right before the ship crashes and he kind of creates that protective cocoon around all the other,
Yeah.
and he says,
He like
"We
makes
are
a big
Groot."
wicker ball.
Yeah,
We are Groot.
but he says,
Oh,
"We
I
are
forgot
Groot."
about that line.
Yeah, I
Oh.
know. I mean, it's pretty significant when you consider. I mean, and then
And he lays down his life
well,
and then he
and
seeds everything
is reborn though too, right? Because then we
and
have
is
the
reborn.
new Groot iteration, or the new, what would you say, like reincarnation or something. It's not, you wouldn't say
Yeah, yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know if you would, but
He's like a swamp thing.
he
He's
does
like
keep his
informed by
body
the
though, right?
consciousness
Like
of
it is still his body because it's
I
the
do
seed
think,
that.
yeah, I think that it's like, well, but yeah, but Swamp Thing's body was never Alec Holland's body either, it turns out, right?
Mm,
It's just Alec Holland's consciousness, but the Swamp Thing's body is of the swamp. So the analogy still applies.
mm.
Come I don't think this was explicitly said. I said that he's like a avatar of like seasons in the forest or whatever, but the Green Man, part of that idea of it being seasonal is like his life, death, rebirth cycle,
Oh yeah.
right? So like that's very much a part of the Green Man idea too. Um, it's interesting, just to I don't want to go back to it for a long time, but like when we talked about Aragorn being like the tree, that's actually kind of an inversion. Like the tree is the symbol of the king, because most of the time we're talking about like a tree is not a person, and then it gets personified by an
Yeah.
avatar of some kind. But in that case, the tree is almost the avatar, and the king is the person, quote unquote, right?
Mm.
And so there's something interesting about that,
Well,
about like maybe they kind of like enter the dynamism between the two, the
Well, and
symbols,
if you're gonna, yeah, and if you want to push that symbolism even further, I mean, if everybody always recognizes Aragorn as, not that he's a direct parallel to Christ, because Tolkien's not making an allegory, but if he's representing the kingly element of Christ, just like Gandalf is the prophetic and Frodo is the priestly, if Aragorn is the kingly role of Jesus, then he's,
Yep,
what is he most connected with? He's connected with the tree, just like Jesus is connected to the cross. And
that's
so
true.
there
That's
again,
a really good point.
it's the, to the degree that the king is united to the tree in this example, right? Christ being
Well,
united to
and
the cross as well.
what's nice about this relationship in Tolkien is it's not an allegory, like you just said, right? In other words,
Yeah.
there's a real relationship between the tree and the king, and it's a real relationship.
Yeah.
It's not just a metaphor and it's not just a symbol or whatever. And then when you bring that into the idea of the king representing Christ, right? And go figure, that Lord of Spirits podcast that I'm always name dropping did just do an episode not that long ago
Scooped
on
us.
and right.
No. You're
How dare
talking
they?
about the kind of the
The,
emperor kingly set
yeah,
of, yeah.
they do a episode on like coronation and king and stuff like that. And um they go to great lengths to point out that the king is the embodiment of Christ on earth. That's what he's meant to play. That's what his role is meant to be. Not in the pagan sense,
Mm,
because back in the pagan times, there was the idea that they were like divine figures because they were like basically possessed by genius or demons and things like that. But the king is the icon The king is the presence of Christ for his kingdom, right? I would put that to our level as a father and say that we're all the monarchs of our
Oh
households,
yeah, that would
right?
definitely
I think
follow.
that's how that's supposed
Well,
to
and
be.
actually, to
And
that point, in Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Catholic traditions, when the couple is married, aren't they given crowns?
they
They
are.
aren't they given
Yes,
crowns
that's true.
at the
Yeah, we
liturgy,
get crowns. It's the crown of martyrdom.
well,
But you know what? So is the king's crown.
mhm.
So is the king's crown.
It's yeah. I mean, so it all
Um,
is supposed to kind of I guess circulate around
and
each other.
ooh, how about this? How do you often see crowns depicted? With filigree on the top,
Oh,
right?
just like
So, like an ancient crown is more just like a ring, right? So sometimes you'll just see like it's basically like a ringlet for your head,
yeah.
right? But then in the more complex crowns, you have like the little spikes, right? And
Mhm.
oftentimes it's like the fleur de lis spikes, like 3 spikes.
Yeah.
But that's just filigree. That's like leaves, right? So what we're seeing here
That's a nice
is the
tie into our
symbolism
ring
of like
episode too.
it is,
Yeah,
yeah, right. We're always just talking about the same
I
thing.
know.
But it's there's natural elements, these tree-like design patterns being put on that crown, you know, and I don't think that's coincidental. I think that plays really nicely into everything we just talked about.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, no,
Mm.
I think this kind of, we talked a lot about the really good modern examples, modern iterations and how they connected back. And so I want to thank you, Jacob, for coming in and continuing this conversation, finally indulging me and talking with me about trees. But if you guys want to come and hear more examples of Jacob doing lines of the Lorax, please just like and subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, review the show so that, again, his I guess what acting chops, he can continue to hone those as well and
I need
maybe do some
and
other
improv
characters for
classes.
us. Yeah, and the improv classes. So thank you guys for joining us
Callbacks.
and
Callbacks all day.
all day.
Now you have to go back and grow by rooting yourself in the foliage of our podcasting.
Boo.
Oh.
Talk to you guys later.
Thanks for listening to Voyage Podcast. The Voyage Podcast is a production of Voyage Comics and Publishing, which seeks to create exceptional entertainment informed by Catholic values that inspire people to live a heroic life. Voyage Comics seeks to advance truth and beauty found in powerful stories. To learn more, visit voyagecomics.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.